The first RTX 5090 benchmarks just leaked, but before I get to that, AMD's not playing around with their 9070 cards, and the 5090 really is huge. Welcome everyone to Gamer Meld. As you can probably already tell, my voice is pretty messed up. Apparently food poisoning wasn't all I got from CES. I now have some kind of an upper respiratory thing, so please bear with me. Either way, first up for today, as you can see right here, we have some news on the RX 9070 XT. Well, actually the 9070 and 9070 XT. This story originally comes from a Meet the Experts webinar where AMD's own Donnie Walagrowski actually confirmed that essentially they're going to be hosting their own event for it. As you can see here, it says, quote, "All I can say about Radeon 9000 is that what we have said is what we can say. We think it deserves its own time in the spotlight. And at CES, things can get kind of washed under a massive amount of information. So stay tuned. It won't be a long time before you'd be hearing more about it in the near future." So yeah, the key part right there is where he says, we think it deserves its own time in the spotlight. And that definitely makes it sound like they're gonna have a completely separate event for the announcement of the card, meaning that they think that it's important enough for its own event. So really hopeful on this. I will say that I may have said this before, but I had spoken with some of AMD's board partners and pretty much every one of them had said they were surprised that it wasn't announced at CES. It's definitely seemed like a last minute thing, but even with that, it looked like all they were going to announce were just the slides that they had given us beforehand, which really gave us little to nothing. It pretty much just confirmed the naming scheme of the cards, and that's it. So even if they did do the announcement, they would probably still have something separate, but it sounds like they just wanted to completely cut it out so it could have its own thing. And next up for today, as we get closer and closer to the RTX 5000 series launch, we're learning more and more about these cards. Specifically, one thing that was just learned officially from Nvidia is the actual die size of the GPUs that make up the cards. So starting things off, we have the GB202, and that is basically the internal name, the code name of the GPU within the RTX 5090. And as you can see, the die size comes in at an unreal 750 millimeters squared. Now, if you follow this channel, that may sound familiar, and that's because this die size actually leaked quite a while ago. So once again, leaks being just completely and utterly spot on. And if you love keeping up to date on all the latest PC hardware news like this, make sure you subscribe to Gamer Meld and hit that bell icon. Not only that, but that would make it just absolutely massive. One of the biggest GPUs for gaming other than the RTX 2080 Ti, which really only came in at 754 millimeters squared. Still, this thing is huge. Then we have the GB203, which makes up the RTX 5080 and 5070 Ti, and this one is 378 millimeters squared versus the 379 millimeters squared of the 4000 cards. So this one is actually slightly smaller. Then finally we have the 5070, which measures in at 263 millimeters squared. So yeah, this may not really be that big of a deal to a lot of people, but what is a huge deal is going to be performance. And we finally have one of our first benchmarks that was just leaked. We have actually quite a few benchmarks here, and then we also have some new ones from Nvidia themselves. But either way, as you can see, starting things off, this one comes from a new Geekbench benchmark, or multiple benchmarks. Like I said, you can see these benchmark passes here. And so we have Vulkan as well as OpenCL. And starting things off with the Vulkan scores, these are definitely quite impressive. When you look at the RTX 4090, we're talking the lowest one is 26% faster and as high as 37% faster with the fastest score. But then when we move over to OpenCL, it isn't nearly as much of a performance boost. This one, the lowest score, measured just 6.7% faster versus the RTX 4090, but it did get as high as 15%. Of course, Geekbench is a synthetic benchmark, so this isn't going to perfectly illustrate the performance jump that you can expect in most games or anything like that, but it does at least give us an idea. With that said, Nvidia actually released some new benchmarks. Now, a lot of the ones that they kind of discuss here is actually ones that I discussed many days ago, but they did give us something new. So originally, the ones that I discussed here, you can see that it's like 1x, 2x. So it doesn't actually give you real FPS numbers. Luckily, this new one that they've given out actually gives us some real FPS, and we can actually compare these with DLSS off. So starting things off, you can see, so this is 4 different games right here. We have Star Wars Outlaws, Cyberpunk 2077, Black Myth Wukong, and Alan Wake 2. Now, Alan Wake 2 and Star Wars Outlaws do not have in-game pre-done benchmarks, so you really can't look at how the 4090 does versus this and try to compare it, simply because you have to have the exact same scene. Simply put, different scenes can have very different FPS, even on the same GPU, based on what it's having to render. It could look like a completely different GPU, but it's really just a different part of the game. Luckily, this can be solved with a built-in benchmark, and both Cyberpunk and Black Myth Wukong both have built-in benchmarks. So assuming Nvidia used them, we should actually be able to make a decent comparison. So starting things off with Cyberpunk 2077, as you can see right here with everything turned to the max, we're looking at around 19 to 20 FPS. But then looking at the RTX 5090, we don't have an exact number, but it looks to me like it's maybe around 30 to 35 FPS. So a very decent jump in terms of performance there. Then with Black Myth Wukong, I actually found this one online. It was kind of hard to find one that definitely used the in-game benchmark, but as you can see here, it got around 23 FPS. And then compare that to the 5090, and once again, we're looking at around maybe 30, 35 FPS. So not as big of a difference, but definitely still a very serious improvement. So with these two, we're looking at around 30 to maybe even as high as 40% faster performance when it comes to DLSS being turned off. So you don't have that 4x frame generation or anything like that to get you these wild numbers. But at the same time, that does mean, like I've said before, that when Nvidia says, ooh, you can get RTX 4090's performance out of the RTX 5070, that's with all of that 4x as well as DLSS, all that stuff turned on. So without all of that on, we're looking at least from these two, around 30 to 40% performance increase. So while that does it for today, which RTX 5000 GPU are you planning to buy? Or are you more looking at AMD's upcoming 9000 series? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up. And as always, have a great day.